Hey, it's Mr. Johns, and today we're going to talk about how to correctly use a ruler or read a ruler or measure with a ruler. Super important. One of the things that's on the top of my list of things I want you to learn and take away from my tech classes. It's something that you will likely use, unlike some things in school, I know. You'll likely use this for the rest of your life to some degree, whether it's a measuring tape, a yardstick, a ruler. You will measure things. So we want to talk about those, the techniques on how to do it correctly. It's always amazing how every year my students tell me they already know how to measure, but they really don't understand the difference between the two systems and how to measure using fractions or millimeters, etc. So there are two types of measurement. The metric system the whole world uses pretty much, based on the number 10. And then there's the U.S. customary system. It's based on fractions. All countries use metrics. Not all countries use the U.S. customary system. Only 3 countries in the world don't use metrics as their main measuring system. Those 3 countries are the United States, Burma, and Myanmar. I don't know why. I don't even know why Burma and Myanmar picked up the U.S. customary system. I have no idea on that. But what I do know is the entire rest of the world uses metrics. So there's got to be a reason. Right now, I'm going to say right up front, I'm not trying to switch you over to metrics, although it's my favorite. I use both. And I think that works great. I think it's the best of both worlds, and I'll explain why. So the United States uses metrics like the rest of the world. They have to in these categories. So international sporting events, the World Cup, the Olympics, etc., we have to. You cannot go to a competition and measure shot put distances in yards if everyone else is doing it in meters. It doesn't work. So we had to adapt. Military, the rest of the world, and we interact with other military services around the world, and so they also use metrics. Medicine, and then scientific study. So let's talk about metrics. I mentioned it's one of my favorites. I'm not a math fan. I'm not a fraction fan. Never have been. So metrics just has always made sense to me because it's all based on the number 10. If I can count to 10, I can measure anything. No problem. So this is a metric ruler we're looking at here, and everything's in tens. Right? So these littlest lines are millimeters, and you could literally just start counting millimeters if you wanted to. It would be repetitive and take a long time. It would be a slow way to do it if you wanted to count all the way to something like that was way off something that's like 6 feet long, right? You could, though. You could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a faster way. So every time you have 10 of those small lines and you get to one of these big numbers, that is a centimeter. So there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. So when I get to this number 1, I can call it 10 millimeters because it's 10 of these small millimeters, or it's 1 centimeter, which it is. Okay. Now, if I go past the 1, I can keep counting millimeters. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Or I can use a decimal. Okay. No, not a fraction. So there are 10 millimeters between each of these lines. So if I go past the 1 and only halfway to the 2, I can say that's what? What's the answer there? 15 millimeters. I could also say it's 1.5 or 1.5. That's the decimal. 1.5 centimeters. if I wanted to. Okay. Now, if you want to keep it simple in your head, you can just count the millimeters. If I went past the 1, let's say 3 lines past the 1, I could just say that's 13 millimeters. And if I want to be faster at that, instead of counting 1, 2, 3, don't be embarrassed if you have to. That's totally fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 millimeters. Or because I know the 1 is also 10 millimeters, I can just say 10 and then plus 3. 10, 11, 12, 13. Much faster. Okay. One thing that a lot of people don't know, 10 centimeters, which is right here, this big number 10, that's also called a decimeter. Rarely used terminology. I never use it. So I just call that 10 centimeters. It is what it is. That's what's so great about metrics. There's no really wrong way as long as you count the lines correctly. So the 10 is either 1 decimeter, it's 10 centimeters, or it's 100 millimeters. It's all based on tens. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Okay? Simple. With metrics, instead of fractions, just use millimeters or decimals, and that's exactly what I just said. I got ahead of myself. So here is my example. Red arrow pointing halfway between the 3 and the 4. It's between the 3 centimeters. Those are the numbers. Remember, ignore this bottom half of the ruler. That's inches. The top half is metrics. So all the numbers are always centimeters. Always. All the lines are always millimeters. So if it's halfway between, you can just say that's 30 plus 5, or 35 millimeters. It's also 3.5 or 3.5 centimeters. Same thing, whatever you are comfortable with. Let's talk about the U.S. system, the U.S. customary system. We grew up with this. I grew up with this. So here's the normal ruler that we have all in our classrooms all over the place. Half of it's inches, half of it's millimeters. So let's focus on just the inches side. And we grew up with this, right? So you've known this for like 13, 14 years. So, right, you should be an expert, right? I'm always surprised. Most of us are not experts in using our own measuring tool, even after 13, 14 years. So let's take a look at this. And maybe it's because it's so confusing. It's fractions. It's like, how do I add those together? How do I, but let's simplify it a bit. So you've got this ruler, and 12 inches equals 1 foot, right? So this ruler is, and by the way, look carefully. The ruler is a little bit more than 12 inches long. They give you a little bit extra wood on both sides of most rulers. So be careful. Don't just measure wood to wood. You need to look for that little line there to make sure. It's got a few fractions of an inch extra. But in general, a ruler is 12 inches or 1 foot. Now, the smallest line, typically, sometimes rulers have smaller lines, but the typical smallest line on a U.S. ruler is a 16th. See, it's a fraction. It doesn't even have a name like a millimeter. It's a fraction. So it's a 16th. So it's a 16th of an inch. Why? There are 16 of them in 1 inch. So if I could zoom in on this, well, I probably could zoom in on this. Boop, boop, boop. Doesn't really matter. But in an inch here, there are 16 little lines on the ruler. Okay? So that's the smallest distance. Sometimes the first inch has twice as many lines, and they count to a 32nd of an inch. Those are really small. They're almost like a millimeter, right? And then you've got 1/8, and you're dividing this 1 inch up, and then a fourth, and then a half. I already said 12 inches equals 1 foot. I could pretty much get rid of that. I've already said that. Don't need to say it again. 12 inches equals 1 foot. 3 feet equals a yard. And 5,280 feet equals a mile. So there's our measuring system that 2 other countries in the world love so much that they claimed for their own. Myanmar and Burma. So I don't know. So let's really look at the inch in detail. So this is, excuse me, this is 1 inch blown up on a ruler. It's missing a whole bunch of lines, so it wouldn't be so confusing to look at. So here's that smallest line. Okay, so remember, this is the edge of the ruler or where that line is. This is 1 inch, and there's 11 more of them right on the ruler. So smallest number, 1/16 of an inch. Next number at 1/8 of an inch. After that, 1/4 of an inch. And see what's happening here is everything's divided in half. Half of an inch, 1 inch. So it really makes more sense to start at the 1 inch and say, okay, half of that is half. Half of that is a fourth, because 1/4 times 2, or 1/4 plus 1/4 equals 2/4, but when reduced is 1/2. Fractions. Half of 1/4 is 1/8. Half of 1/8 is 1/16. Half of 1/16 is 1/32. And yes, technically, there's a 1/64. I've seen rulers, they have like little lines. So that's our system. If you just divide everything in half, or multiply everything by 2, that's the system. Does it make a lot of sense to you? I mean, I guess it does. Everything's divided, but you've got a lot of fractions. So now the nice thing is you can just count the lines here too. So let's say it's not an inch, and I know you can't see all these lines, but let's say there are 16 lines, and we need to measure something that stops at the 14th line. Well, how do we measure that? And by the way, I'm not a math teacher. I will not require you to reduce to the lowest common denominator. Your math teacher would. For me, if you're reading a ruler, it doesn't matter to me. If you count 14 of the 16 lines and you say it's 14/16 of an inch, you are 100% correct. Could you reduce that to 7/16? Sure. Or sorry, 7/8. You have to reduce both. 7, yeah, because that's a whole other different number. So 7/8 is the same as 14/16. You just divide them in half. If you can divide a number in half, then that's called reducing it, right? If you can't, then you can't. So anyway, it doesn't matter to me, but that's. I hope that makes sense. You just count the lines. So if it's 13/16, there's your measurement. If it's 11/16, there's your measurement. If it's 8/16, by the way, that's the same as 1/2, because if you divide, 8 and 16 divided in half is 4/8. Divided in half again, because reducing, you always keep going until you can't reduce anymore. So 4/8, half of that is 2/4. Half of that is 1/2. Whoo, we finally got there, half an inch. Okay, so that's why that's 1/2. Technically, it's 8/16. Really? That's really what it is right there. I would rather see it 8/16. It just makes more sense to my brain, because fractions hurt my brain. What if you're measuring something and it's longer? Oh, longer. Another typo, Mr. J. What if you're measuring something that's longer than 1 inch? Well, you just count the last inch you passed, then how many of the little lines, the 16ths, before the next inch. So what's this measurement here? This red arrow. It's pointing at the ruler. It's pointing at that line, the long line there, between the 4 and the 5. What's the measurement? So it's pointing to the 12th line after the 4. The last inch, you went 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, it's not to 5 yet. It's not 5 inches long. It's 4 and something. Well, there's 12 of those somethings. There's 12 of little lines. So you could measure it as 4 and 12/16 of an inch. Perfectly fine measurement. 4 and 12/16. And that is really good measurement right on the nose there. You could write it as, right here in purple, 4-12/16 inch, which is quote. Remember, apostrophe is feet. quote is inches. So this is 4. It's read as 4 and 12/16 of an inch. And most people just say 4 and 12/16. They know exactly what you're talking about. You can also reduce it if you're a math teacher and a math lover and you don't want to make your math teacher mad and say it's 4 and 6/8. 4 and 6/8. But wait, shouldn't you reduce that more? Yes. Math teachers all over the world are upset right now. If they're watching this, they're not. 4 and 3/4 of an inch. Look at that. And the program I'm using even switched it to a fancy little fraction, 3/4, because you can divide 3 and 8 both in half, 3/4. So that it can't reduce any more than that. So that measurement right there is 4 and 3/4, which, by the way, I knew when I looked at that and put that arrow there, by the way, I knew that it would be 3/4 just because you can divide it up into 4 of those sections, and it's pointing at the third one. Okay, so, woo, all right. So I hope that all makes sense to you, but just keep it simple. 4 and count numbers. That's it. Metrics, just count numbers, right? So we will be using both metric and US measuring in my class, and I oftentimes will call them, you're going to measure this in millimeters, or you're going to measure this one in inches. So that you'll know what I'm talking about. When I say millimeters, I mean metrics. When I say inches, I'm talking about the US customary system, which I stumble over, so I don't call it that. I just say measure it in inches. So metrics is great for smaller things. I really started using a lot when I was designing things for the 3D printer or building things that were really, really small, and I get tired of fractions. So I just started counting lines on the metric side of the ruler, and I just fell in love with it. So just super easy. I would say rarely make a mistake when I'm measuring in metrics because it's easy. However, the US customary system is great for bigger things, or if you're just comfortable with fractions and that doesn't scare you at all. So if I am building a shed or a house, I'm not going to say it's 10,500 centimeters, right? I'm going to use something bigger like 16 feet, and those aren't the same. They don't match, but you get my point. So anything small, millimeters, anything big, inches and feet, that seems to work the best, especially growing up in America. I imagine the rest of the world, they don't even use US. They don't use feet and inches. And so they probably say it's so many meters long, right? That's normal for them. And their brains just work that way, and ours don't. So this is kind of my mix. I use both. So we're going to get familiar, comfortable, and use this a lot in my class. And if you have questions, ask. I want you to be comfortable with both. And I'm anxious to see which one you prefer. So we're going to do some work with this stuff now. For now, Mr. Johns is out.